Hello everyone. I'm going to start another series of videos going over the second homework assignments. I hope this helps and perhaps I'll launch the next series prior to the assignments being due. Now for this one, I'm going to do the first homework assignment, which is where you are being prompted for an integer, and when you enter a positive, it'll just keep asking you and asking you and asking you and asking you until you enter a negative number. And once you enter a negative number, it'll return the results of the maximum number that you entered, the positive number, and then the lowest number that you entered that was also positive. So here I entered 700 was our maximum number, and then 100 was the lowest number. And so we're going to write this program. That was our first homework assignment. So let's get started. Here, first thing we'll do is prompt the user for an integer. So user input int and then raw input. We'll do enter a negative number. Oops. We'll do that. And then we'll have to have some other values that'll store these numbers, and then we'll return them back to us when we enter a negative number. So we'll call the first one, we'll call it max int, and we'll set that equal to an empty string, and then we'll have a min int, and we'll set that equal to an empty string because it has no values to it. We could put 0, but then zero, if in case 0 is not inputted by the user, it's it'll be kind of incorrect. So let's do the if statement. So for this, we want there to be if user underscore input is greater than or equal to 0. So it has to be a purely negative number, or there's no other kind. Then if the user input is greater than 0, we then take that user input and we'll assign the value of user input to the max integer and the minimum integer, because it'll just be one value. So it'll be then the max integer equals the user underscore input, and the minimum integer equals the user input. And then so we have that. So in the case that it'll I'll explain it to you later. So now we'll do the while loop, and we'll do while because it wants to keep asking and asking while it's still positive. So we'll do while user underscore input is greater than or equal to 0. We'll then re-ask you this question, or we'll still prompt you for an integer. So we'll do that, and then while it keeps prompting us for an integer, every time they enter one, we want that integer to be stored into these values. So we'll do if the user input is greater than the maximum integer, then that maximum integer equals the user input. And then we'll make an elif the user input is less than or equal to the minimum integer. Then we'll do the same. We'll do the same here. So the minimum integer will equal the user underscore input. And then once we break from this loop, we'll let's say the user inputs a negative number, it'll end all this and it'll just go directly to the print, which is this right here, print you enter a negative number and then showing the result. So we'll do that. We'll do print you have entered a negative number, and then showing results. Then we'll print the maximum number is, and remember when you're separating a string from an integer, you need to put the comma. I shared this in one of my earlier videos. Make sure you put the comma or it'll crash the program. And so you put the maximum number is, and then we get the variable, the max integer, and then we'll do the same here. The minimum number is, and then it'll be the minimum integer. Alright, so let's see if this works. Alright, enter a negative number, enter 600, 500, 700, 100, -5, and it returns -5. So I didn't run this check in here. So in here, I'm gonna have to make it 0 less than or equal to. In the case the user inputs 0. So it won't take the negative number, it'll take just the purely, I don't know why I keep saying purely, it'll just take non-negative numbers. So let's try this again. 600, oops, 500, 700, 100, -5. So there we go. You have entered a negative number, showing the results. The maximum number is 700, and the minimum number is 100. So that's what we did here. Let's try it if we only enter one value, -100, and then so it'll give us 100 and 100, and that's what I was doing here. So before the while loop, but after the if statement, if the user only inputs one number, it won't go directly into asking us again for another integer. We want to store that initial number, and then that way, in the case the user only inputs one number, it'll return that one number. Otherwise, it'll just keep asking us for the next one, and it'll just ignore the first integer the user inputs. So that's what this if statement's for. So you prompt the user for an input. You then have your initial your max integer and your min integer values. So let's see what happens if we don't enter 1. So the maximum number is blank and the minimum number is blank. You can change these to be like something like this, or this would be like this, or basically into anything. You can put nothing and run something like this. Oops, yes. Be like, the minimum number is nothing. It doesn't really have to be an empty string, but I just put empty strings. So yeah, we have the user input, and then we have our maximum integer and our minimum integer, and then we error check, or I always say error check. It's just a regular check. In the case that the user inputs a positive number, it then stores that number into the max and the minimum integer, so that way when you only enter one, it'll return them both as the maximum and the minimum. And then then we go into our while loop, and so while it's greater than, it'll keep asking you, and as it asks you, if the user input is greater than our maximum integer, then it'll store it in the max integer. And then here, we'll do our elif. If the user input is less than the minimum integer, then it'll store that as well. So, and then once it breaks from the while loop, it'll print our values here. You have entered negative number showing results. The maximum number is the maximum integer, and then the minimum number is the minimum integer. So that's how you do the first homework assignment for the second homework. Alright.